there any fans of Meghan Markle in tonight?
No.
There are moments online when everything feels normal, until suddenly it doesn't.
She's playing herself?
A single forgotten recording surfaces, a clipped sentence escapes the vault, and the internet stops breathing for a second.
So I thought, yeah, old Princess Pinocchio's off on a good one
Challenge.
here. And then the rest of it was, all the racism claims turned out to be bullshit. The mental health claims were bull. All of it was bullshit.
That's what happened the night an old, unaired interview cracked open a brand new storm around Meghan Markle. A storm she never saw coming. Because this time, the voice speaking wasn't a critic, a tabloid, or a troll. It was someone far more dangerous. Someone who once stood beside her. Every major royal controversy seems to begin the same way. A whisper, a rumor, a flicker on social media that most people scroll past. But this one didn't stay a flicker. It erupted.
Designed to damage and attack the royal family, the monarchy, and all of it. And it made me puke.
Let's not forget the Oprah performance.
Oh, yeah.
What?
They
What?
did what? These people?
What?
The first spark came when a well-known broadcaster announced that he'd been digging through his old archives, the kind that usually contained forgotten interviews, unused questions, or behind-the-scenes conversations that never made it to air. At first, hardly anyone paid attention. It sounded harmless enough, almost boring. But then the hint dropped. One of the recordings had been blocked years ago, long before Meghan and Harry's public storm began. And within minutes, that harmless little archive tease turned into digital TNT. When the clip finally appeared, it wasn't polished or dramatic. It was grainy, time-stamped, and clearly recorded in a small studio. Across from the interviewer sat a figure whose face had been blurred out. The audio was distorted at first, but then, like a curtain lifting, one quiet sentence came through clearly. Just a handful of words, yet they felt like they detonated across the internet. People froze the frame, rewound, played it again. And that's when the avalanche began. An avalanche Meghan reportedly felt instantly. Inside her circle, the reaction was immediate and intense. The moment the recording spread, insiders described pure chaos. Lights on, phones buzzing nonstop, assistants racing between rooms. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just embarrassment. It was something deeper. The realization that an old voice, one from her earlier world, had finally spoken.
How dark your baby was going to be?
It was ridiculous. And you know who they were talking about, by the way, because they accidentally put the names of the alleged racists in I think it was a Danish copy of the book by Omid Scobie.
Yeah.
This
the
little
Omid
rat bag who writes books supporting.
And for Meghan, that was the one scenario she had spent years trying to avoid. Because this wasn't a critic taking a jab. It wasn't a commentator airing an opinion. It was someone who had once been close enough to know the earliest chapters of her story, the private goals, the personal conversations, the ambitions that existed before the royal spotlight ever touched her. The kind of person who never should have had their voice on a leaked recording, let alone one hinting that Meghan's intentions had been far bigger than anyone realized. Meanwhile, the internet did what it always does when given a mystery. It turned into a global investigation team. Fans, analysts, creators, and amateur detectives worked like a digital swarm. People clipped the audio, enhanced it, slowed it down, sped it up, compared it to old interviews, and began building theories. Within hours, social media felt like a live crime scene. Comment sections turned into investigations. Everyone demanded one answer. Who was the voice? And why were they talking now? As the speculation exploded, one thing became obvious. Whether the clip was harmless or catastrophic didn't matter anymore. What mattered was perception. The story had already taken on a life of its own. And behind the scenes, Meghan and her team were scrambling, not simply to stop the leak, but to figure out who among her old connections had finally broken the silence. The moment the clip hit major platforms, the reaction was instant.
The two members of the royal family who apparently expressed concern about the skin color of their unborn child were King Charles, Prince Charles at the time, and Catherine, William's wife.
Hashtags popped up like fireworks. People started using the phrase from the recording as a punchline, a headline, a warning. Reaction channels rushed to upload breakdowns. Commentators stitched the audio into longer analysis videos. Body language experts lined up to explain what this one sentence supposedly revealed about Meghan's entire strategy. It was dramatic, messy, and loud, exactly the kind of public storm that Meghan's team works desperately to avoid. Inside her camp, it was the opposite of loud. It was focused, sharp, a full-scale emergency drill. One insider later claimed that Meghan did not just get upset, she snapped into war mode. Calls were made to lawyers, PR advisors were pulled in immediately. Screens lit up in every room, replaying the same few seconds over and over again, as if watching it on repeat would somehow reveal who had failed her. Because for Meghan, this wasn't just about one sentence. It was about control. Control of her story, control of her image, control of a narrative she has spent years building, brick by brick. At the center of the chaos stood the broadcaster who released the clip, completely unfazed. He hinted that the recording was just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. He suggested there were hours of conversations that had never seen daylight, not because they were boring, but because someone, somewhere, once decided they were too explosive to share. That suggestion alone was enough to set Meghan's team into overdrive. If there was more, what did more look like? Who else spoke on tape? What was said about her, about Harry, about the royal family? And most importantly, who had the power to release it now?
Now, how likely do you think it is that either of those two people expressed negative concern about the skin color of an unborn child? Absolutely big fat zero.
Yep.
And yet that was what they told the world in that interview.
As the hours passed, attention shifted from what was said to who had said it. Online detectives started combing through old interviews and panels, hunting for any voice that matched the tone and rhythm in the clip. Theories began to form. Was it a palace staff member who had seen everything from the inside? Was it a publicist who once helped manage Meghan's image? Was it someone from her acting days? Someone who knew her before titles and tiaras entered the picture? The guesses flew faster than anyone could track. While all this played out publicly, one thing remained strikingly quiet: the palace. In situations like this, royal watchers usually expect subtle signals, a calm line of guidance from friendly reporters, or at least a hint that the institution was leaning one way or another. This time, nothing. No anonymous quotes, no background notes, no sources close to the royal household stepping in to shift the mood. Just silence. And that silence was loud enough to make Meghan's team even more uneasy, because with every hour that passed, it became clear that this wasn't just an internet scandal. It was something more dangerous, a moment when someone from Meghan's past might be pulling back the curtain. And if one person had started talking, it raised a terrifying question in that Montecito crisis room. Who might be next?
That's why I thought it was so disgusting. And all right, in the end, I was told that 57,000 people complained to the television regulator, Ofcom, in the UK. A world record, I'm proud to say, complained about me for not believing Princess Pinocchio.
As the night went on, the mystery only deepened. Every hour brought a new theory, a new guess, a new angle. Some people swore they recognized the pacing of the speaker. Others insisted it had to be someone who knew Meghan during her transition into royal life. Those early months when everything about her career, her public image, and her personal world was shifting at high speed. And with every new theory, the tension inside Meghan's home grew heavier. What made the situation more explosive was the broadcaster's timing. Just when people thought the internet might quiet down, he returned with a single sentence that sent the entire story rocketing into the stratosphere. There's more where that came from. That line alone sent Meghan's PR team spinning, because if one sentence caused this much chaos, what would happen if there were more clips, more voices, more recordings the palace had buried years earlier? Online, creators began comparing the leaked audio to every interview Meghan had ever discussed, every panel she'd appeared on, every person who had spoken about working with her. People clipped old footage, putting voice patterns side by side, looking for matching pauses, matching breaths, matching emphasis. It felt like half the internet became amateur audio engineers overnight. And then came the shift. The moment everything went from speculation to certainty.
Two things about the woke mob, and she's the high priestess of wokery, and her husband's the high priest halfwit of wokery. And the truth about it is, never bow to the mob, never grovel, never apologize, never give them an inch. And when you have something that's a point of principle, stand up for yourself and walk the fuck out.
A small TikTok account, barely followed by anyone, posted a side-by-side voice comparison that suddenly made the entire conversation explode. The cadence, the little inhale, the sharp finish at the end of each sentence, it all matched. Voice analysts chimed in. Twitter accounts synchronized the waveforms. You didn't need to be an expert. Anyone with ears could hear the similarities. And once the match caught fire, the identity of the speaker raced across social platforms like lightning. This was no random acquaintance, no casual coworker, no distant observer with a grudge. This was someone who had known Meghan long before the palace gates ever opened for her. someone who was there when she was building her brand, shaping her image, making decisions that would change the course of her life. Someone who had been close, maybe too close, during the most important transformation of her career. That revelation changed everything inside Meghan's inner circle, because if this was who people believed it was, then the leak wasn't just a mistake or a random betrayal, it was a fracture, a sign that someone from her past had decided to speak, and if they were willing to say one sentence on tape, what else might they be willing to share? Within hours, Meghan's lawyers were scrambling to identify who had rights to what, which contracts were still active, and what kind of legal ground they even had.
She's a bully, and her acting career, or whatever she's trying to do, is going to fail, just like everything else she touched fails.
I thought, didn't you think the Dodgers video clip from their living room,
God,
with her waltzing around,
Yes.
yes,
like a
it was
hyena.
literally like a hyena with a spear in its back, wasn't it?
Calls went out to producers, networks, former colleagues, anyone who might know how the clip resurfaced after all these years. Meanwhile, reporters began quietly checking in with Meghan's old connections. Names that hadn't surfaced in years suddenly became relevant again. Because if this voice belonged to who the internet believed, then this wasn't a simple leak. This was the beginning of a much bigger unraveling. And everyone, Meghan, her team, the media, and the palace, knew it. The fallout didn't stop with the voice reveal. In fact, that was only the beginning, because once the internet settled on the identity of the speaker, all eyes shifted to Meghan's past, the people she once trusted, the circles she once moved through, the friends she once relied on. And that's when the real panic reportedly began inside her Montecito home. Not because of what had already leaked, but because of what might come next. While Meghan's team worked through the night, one uncomfortable truth hung in the air. The broadcaster hadn't released the full interview, not even close. If this insider had already given one explosive comment, who knew what the rest of the archived footage contained? Plans? Opinions? Private conversations? Early intentions she never meant the world to hear? That uncertainty was enough to set off a second wave of crisis calls, with advisors trying to predict every possible scenario before the next clip dropped.
And
then
Harry's face.
The half-wit sat there like he was doped out of his brains, which he probably was. And the whole thing was so cringe, wasn't it?
It was awful.
Terrible.
I really want there to be a season 3, though, of With Love, Meghan. Don't you want to see another? Do you want to see another Maureen Callahan parody? We got to do it.
Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening online. People began digging through old relationships, not in a scandalous way, but with curiosity. They started asking who, in Meghan's early life, would have known the truth behind the scenes, who had been close enough to hear her goals before they were wrapped in royal protocol, who had been around when she was still balancing Hollywood ambition with the possibility of becoming a global figure. That curiosity led the internet straight to Meghan's earliest orbit, the colleagues, collaborators, and friends who helped shape her path. And in that swirl of names, one stood out more than the others, her ex-husband. He hadn't said a word publicly in years. Not one interview, not one comment. His silence had always been almost unnervingly perfect, but the moment the leaked clip went viral, people noticed something subtle but powerful. His social media locked down, comments disabled, then he went silent altogether. And if Meghan was already uneasy, that moment reportedly hit her hard, because she knew, better than anyone, that he was one of the few people who truly understood her before the royal world ever touched her life. He was there in the days when her brand was being formed, when her career was climbing, when her ambitions were taking shape. He knew things no one else did. And if another insider had spoken, who was to say he wouldn't? Back on television, the broadcaster seemed to sense the shift. He leaned into the moment with a kind of theatrical confidence, dropping hints, raising eyebrows, and enjoying every second of the unfolding spectacle. Then came the moment that froze the entire internet again. He introduced the second leaked clip with no warning, no buildup, just a cool, controlled line. Let's move to clip number 2. The studio behind him reacted instantly. Gasps, phones buzzing, staff whispering in shock. But the reaction inside Meghan's home was very different. It wasn't surprise, it was dread, because the second clip wasn't just a repeat of the first. It was sharper, clearer, and far more damaging. The insider's voice returned steady and deliberate, delivering a statement that set the online world ablaze. A simple sentence that challenged everything Meghan had publicly claimed for years. And as soon as those words hit the airwaves, it became obvious. This crisis wasn't just about reputation anymore. This was about trust, about loyalty, and about the possibility that someone Meghan once considered part of her inner circle had turned their back on her, publicly, permanently, and with receipts. By the time the second clip had finished playing, the story was no longer just a trending topic. It had become a full-blown test of Meghan's public image. The phrase about outgrowing the institution spread everywhere, pulled out of context, pasted into headlines, turned into memes and reaction thumbnails. Commentators argued over what it really meant. Was it proof of a long-term strategy? Just an offhand comment? A misunderstanding? It didn't matter. Online, perception beats nuance every single time. Inside Meghan's camp, the mood was very different from the noise on social media. According to those close to the situation, the focus wasn't on memes or jokes, it was on damage control. Crisis meetings ran long into the night. Every upcoming appearance, every project, every partnership was suddenly being reviewed through a new lens. How will this look if more clips drop? Because that was the fear now. Not just what had already been revealed, but what still might be sitting in that unseen archive. One voice had already cracked the door open. If there were more recordings, more insiders, more off-camera comments, what else could come out? At the same time, the palace's silence continued. No statements, no quiet guidance to reporters, no subtle push to move on from the drama. That stillness spoke volumes. It suggested that, for once, the institution was content to watch from a distance, while the storm circled someone who had walked away from its protection. For Meghan, that silence may have felt less like neutrality and more like a message. This time, she would be riding out the wave alone. Meanwhile, the public's attention shifted again, away from the clips themselves and toward a bigger question: who else might talk? If one former insider had stepped forward, even indirectly, did that mean others were thinking about it too? Old colleagues, ex-friends, former staff, people from earlier chapters of her life, the speculation surrounded them all. Some were suddenly quiet on social media, some locked down their accounts, some simply disappeared from public view. And each move, each silence, only fueled the idea that more stories might be waiting in the wings. For Meghan, this wasn't just about one broadcaster or one insider anymore. It was about control slipping away. For years, she and Harry have tried to tell their side of the story through interviews, books, documentaries, and carefully crafted messaging. But the hidden interview bombshell showed something uncomfortable. The past doesn't always stay where you leave it. Old footage can resurface. Old alliances can shift. Old conversations can be replayed for a brand new audience that is hungry for contradictions and hidden chapters. As the dust began to settle, one truth remained. Whether every claim in those clips was fair or exaggerated, whether the insider was bitter or honest, whether the broadcaster was exposing something important or simply chasing attention, the impact was real. It reshaped how some people saw Meghan's journey. It put fresh cracks in an image she had worked hard to polish. And it reminded everyone watching that in the age of archives and algorithms, no story is ever completely finished. So where does that leave things now? In a tense pause, the broadcaster hints there is more. Meghan's team prepares as if the next wave could hit at any second. The palace stays quiet, watching from behind old stone walls, and the world waits to see whether this was just a brief flare-up or the opening chapter of something much bigger. Because if there's one thing this hidden interview has proven, it's this: when buried recordings finally see the light, they don't just replay the past, they rewrite the present.